The storm had been raging for 3 days when Clara Morrison found the stranger collapsed in her barn. Lightning split the Texas sky as she struggled to milk her only cow by lantern light, the wind howling through the gaps in the weathered boards. With a fury that matched her own desperation, at 26 she had already buried a husband and watched her small homestead slowly crumble under the weight of debt and loneliness. The thunder was so loud that she almost missed the weak groan. Coming from the corner where she stored her meager supply of hay, Clara raised the lantern higher, its flickering light revealing a man sprawled unconscious among the scattered straw. Blood had soaked through his shirt, and his face was pale as moonlight. But something about the strong line of his jaw and the gentle curve of his mouth made her heart skip in a way it hadn't since Daniel had died 2 years ago. "Dear Lord," she whispered, setting down the milk pail and rushing to his side. "What happened to you?" The man couldn't answer, but his breathing was so shallow that Clara had to press her ear to his chest to confirm he was still alive. The steady but weak rhythm of his heartbeat filled her with determination. She had lost too much already to let death claim another soul under her roof. With strength born of necessity, Clara managed to drag the unconscious stranger into her small cabin. He was tall and lean, with the calloused hands of a working man, and clothes that spoke of long days in the saddle. A cowboy, she guessed, probably thrown from his horse during the storm. The bullet wound in his shoulder suggested a different, more dangerous story. She worked through the night, cleaning his wound by candlelight and wrapping it with strips torn from her own petticoat. His fever burned so hot that she feared he might not see morning, so she bathed his face with cool water and whispered prayers into the darkness, begging God not to take this stranger whose name she didn't even know. As dawn broke gray and stormy, the man's eyes fluttered open for the first time. They were the color of sage-grass in summer, green and deep, and filled with pain that seemed to go beyond his physical injuries. Where... He tried to speak, but his voice was barely a croak. Clara soothed, bringing a cup of water to his lips. "You're safe. You're in my home. Don't try to talk yet." He drank gratefully, those remarkable eyes never leaving her face. When he was finished, he managed to whisper, "Thank you." The simple words spoken with such genuine gratitude touched something deep in Clara's heart. "What's your name?" "Jake," he said after a moment's hesitation. "Jake, Miller." Something in his pause made Clara suspect that Miller wasn't his real surname, but she had learned not to ask too many questions on the frontier. Everyone had reasons for keeping parts of their past private. "Well, Jake Miller, you've been shot and you nearly died from fever. You're not going anywhere for a while, so you might as well settle in and let yourself heal." As Jake slowly recovered, Clara learned that he had a quick smile and a gentle way with her animals that spoke of a man comfortable with simple living. He helped however he could, despite his injury, mending her broken fence posts, fixing the shutter that had hung crooked since the last storm, somehow making her meager meals taste better just by sharing them with grateful appreciation. But it was the little things that made Clara's heart flutter with dangerous feelings. The way he always insisted she sit down first at their small table, how he would quietly take over the harder chores without being asked. The evening he spent hours braiding a new lead rope for her cow because he'd noticed the old one was fraying. "You don't have to do all this," Clara protested one evening as she watched him carefully whittling a new handle for her broken water bucket. Jake looked up from his work, and in the lamplight his eyes seemed to hold depths of sadness she was only beginning to understand. "You saved my life, Clara. I'll never be able to repay that debt." "I don't want repayment," she said softly. "Just want to see you get well." Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition, an understanding, a spark of connection that neither had expected. Clara felt her cheeks warm and looked away, but not before she saw Jake's expression soften with something that looked remarkably like wonder. As the days passed, Clara found herself looking forward to their quiet conversations by the fire, too. The sound of Jake's laughter when she told him stories about the antics of her chickens, to the way he listened when she spoke about Daniel and the dreams they'd shared before consumption took him away. Jake, in turn, began to share pieces of his own story. He spoke of growing up on a ranch, of learning to read the sky for weather and the land for water. He talked about the loneliness of the trail, the brotherhood of cowboys, and the way the vast Texas landscape could make a man feel both infinite and utterly small. But Clara noticed he never spoke of family, never mentioned where he'd come from or where he'd been headed when misfortune found him. The expensive leather of his boots and the quality of his horse's tack, which had been found a mile away with the animal, safely sheltered in a grove of trees, suggested he came from more than just cowboy wages. But she didn't press everyone. Deserved their secrets, especially someone who'd been shot and left for dead. One evening, as they sat on Clara's small porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jake asked about her late husband. "Daniel was a good man," Clara said, her voice soft with memory. "We married young, full of dreams about the life we'd build together. He wanted to raise cattle, have children, grow old watching our grandchildren play in this very yard. What happened? Consumption took him in the winter of '87. He fought it for months. But—" Clara's voice trailed off and she wiped at her eyes. "I've been alone ever since, trying to keep the homestead going, but it's hard. The bank wants their money, and I don't have much left to give them." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "How much do you?" "Oh," Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "More than I'll ever have. $300? Might as well be 3,000 for all the chance I have of raising it." She didn't see the way Jake's hands clenched into fists, or the determined set of his jaw in the gathering darkness. The next morning, Clara woke to find Jake's bed empty and a note on her kitchen table, written in careful script. "Clara, thank you for everything. You gave me more than my life back. I'll never forget your kindness. Take care of yourself." Jake was gone, along with his horse and gear, leaving behind only the memory of gentle hands and kind eyes. And the ache of another loss in Clara's already wounded heart, she told herself it was for the best. Jake was a drifter, a cowboy whose life was the open road. She was a widow with debts and responsibilities, a woman whose heart had already been broken once by death. They came from different worlds, and whatever she'd begun to feel for him was just loneliness and gratitude, confused with something deeper. But as the days turned into weeks, Clara found herself looking toward the horizon whenever she heard hoofbeats, hoping against hope that Jake might return. The little improvements he'd made around her homestead reminded her daily of his presence, and sometimes she caught herself setting two places at the table before remembering she was alone again. Winter was approaching when the letter arrived. The banker, Mr. Harrington, delivered it himself, his expression unusually grave as he handed Clara the official-looking envelope. Her hands trembled as she read the contents, not the foreclosure notice she'd been expecting, but something far more confusing. The mortgage on her property had been paid in full. It's $300, plus interest, plus enough extra to see her through the next year's expenses. The payment had come from a bank in San Antonio, with instructions that the transaction remain anonymous. "I don't understand," Clara said, looking up at Mr. Harrington with bewildered eyes. "Who would do this?" The banker shrugged, but his expression was kind. "Someone who cares about you, I'd imagine. You've got friends you didn't know about, Mrs. Morrison." That night, Clara sat alone in her cabin and cried tears of relief, of confusion, and of a longing so deep it frightened her. Only one person could have known about her debt, could have cared enough to help. Jake Miller was just a cowboy she'd found dying in her barn. Where would he have gotten that kind of money? Unless Jake Miller wasn't who he'd claimed to be. Spring brought answers. In the form of an elegant carriage rolling up her dusty lane, pulled by 4 matching horses that spoke of serious wealth, Clara watched from her window as a distinguished older man in an expensive suit stepped down, his silver hair gleaming in the sunlight and his bearing suggesting someone accustomed to command. She opened the door before he could knock, her heart hammering with a mixture of anticipation and dread. "Mrs. Morrison." His voice was cultured, refined, with just a trace of Texas drawl. "My name is William Thornton. I believe you knew my son." The name hit Clara like a physical blow. Thornton, not Miller. She should have known. The expensive gear, the educated. Way Jake spoke, the easy confidence that came from being born to privilege. She'd saved the son of one of the wealthiest cattle barons in Texas. "Jake," she whispered. William Thornton nodded, his expression softening. "Jacob, he told me everything. How you found him, how you nursed him back to health, how you opened your home to a stranger without asking for anything in return." See? Clara couldn't finish the question. Clara stared at him in shock. "Not good enough. He's a Thornton. I'm just a poor widow with a failing homestead. Money doesn't make a man, Mrs. Morrison. My son learned that lesson the hard way." William's expression grew serious. "Jacob left our ranch 2 years ago after we had a terrible fight about his future. Wanted him to take over the business, to marry a woman I'd chosen for her connections and fortune. He wanted to make his own way in the world, to find out who he was without. The Thornton name opening doors for him." Clara's heart ached as the pieces fell into place. "So he became a cowboy. A damned good one, too. Worked for outfits all over Texas. Earned respect with his hands and his character instead of his birthright. I was so proud of him and too stubborn to admit it." William's voice grew thick with emotion. "When he didn't come home for Christmas, I hired men to find him. That's how I learned he'd been shot by rustlers trying to steal the herd he was protecting. They left him for dead. But I found him," Clara whispered. "Hey, you found him. And according to Jacob, you did more than save his life. You showed him what love really looks like. Not the calculated marriages of society, but genuine care, sacrifice, selflessness." William stepped closer, his eyes earnest. "Paid off your mortgage because he loves you, Mrs. Morrison. But he won't come back because he thinks the difference in your circumstances makes it impossible." Down her cheeks. "Where is he? Working a ranch outside of San Antonio, still using the name Miller? Still convinced that he has to choose between his family and his heart?" William reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "I came here to give you this, and to tell you that if Jacob is fool enough to let pride keep him from the woman he loves, then he deserves to be miserable." Clara's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter in Jake's careful handwriting. "My dearest Clara, by now you know the truth about who I am. And you probably understand why I couldn't tell you. When I was lying in your barn, dying from my wounds and my foolish pride, you didn't care about my name or my family's money. You saw a human being in need and opened your heart without question. In those weeks I spent in your home, I learned what real wealth looks like. It's in the way you sang while you cooked our simple meals. It's in your gentle hands caring for wounded things. It's in your courage to keep fighting even when everything seemed hopeless. I love you, Clara. I love your strength, your kindness, your laughter. I love the way you make a house feel like a home, and the way you believe in tomorrow, even when today is hard. Love you more than I've ever loved anything in my life. But I can't ask you to marry into a world that would never accept you, that would judge you for your humble beginnings, and try to change everything I love about you. I won't subject you to the snubs and whispers of society ladies who wouldn't. Understand that you're worth more than all of them combined. Know that you saved more than my life, you saved my soul. Wherever I go, whatever I do, I'll carry the memory of your love with me always. Forever yours, Jacob." Clara pressed the letter to her chest, her heart breaking and soaring at the same time. The foolish, noble, wonderful man thought he was protecting her from his world, never realizing that all she wanted was to be part of his. "How do I find him?" she asked William. The older man's eyes twinkled with something that looked like hope. "That depends, my dear. Are you prepared to fight for him?" Clara thought of all she'd endured the death of her husband. The struggle to survive alone, the loneliness that had nearly broken her spirit. She thought of Jake's hands gentle on her broken fence, his laugh warming her kitchen, the way he'd looked at her as if she were something precious and rare. "I've been fighting my whole life," she said firmly. "I'm not about to stop now." The journey to San Antonio took 2 days in William Thornton's comfortable carriage. But it felt like a lifetime to Clara. She'd packed her few good dresses and the small keepsakes that mattered most to her, leaving the homestead in the care of her neighbor with instructions to sell it if she didn't return. "You're giving up everything," William observed as they rolled through the Texas countryside. "No," Clara said. watching the landscape blur past. I'm finally claiming everything that matters. They found Jacob at the running horse ranch, working with a small herd of Mustangs in the late afternoon sun. Clara's breath caught at the sight of him, tall and strong and alive, his movements fluid and confident as he gentled a skittish mare with patient hands. He looked up at the sound of the approaching carriage, and Clara saw the exact moment he recognized his father. His face went through a dozen emotions: surprise, wariness, resignation, and finally, a kind of weary acceptance. But when Clara stepped down from the carriage, Jacob's world seemed to stop. Clara. His voice was barely a whisper, as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. She walked toward him slowly, drinking in the sight of him after months of aching absence. "Hello, Jake. What are you doing here?" He looked between her and his father, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You told her? She deserved to know the truth," William said quietly. "And you deserve to know that love doesn't give a damn about social standing." Jacob's eyes never left Clara's face. "You shouldn't have come. You don't understand what my world is like, what they'd put you through." "No," Clara said, stepping close enough to touch him. "You don't understand what my world is like. It's empty without you. It's just surviving instead of living. It's half a life when all I want is to share a whole one with you." Jacob's hands came up to frame her face, his touch achingly gentle. "Clara, I have nothing to offer you but complications. In a society that will never accept." She silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her love and longing and determination into the contact. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I don't want society," she said firmly. "I don't want complications or easy acceptance or any of the things you think I need. I want you, Jacob Thornton. I want to wake up next to you and grow old with you and build a life that's ours, whatever that looks like. The money I sent gave me the freedom to choose," Clara finished. "And I choose you. I choose us. If your father's world won't accept me, then we'll make our own world." Jacob looked at his father, who was watching the scene with tears in his eyes. "Dad, I've spent 2 years missing my son," William said roughly. "If Clara Morrison makes you happy, then she's welcome in any world I'm part of. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "your mother was a rancher's daughter when I married her. Society got over it." Jacob pulled Clara into his arms then, holding her as if he'd never let her go. "Are you sure?" He whispered against her hair. "Are you absolutely sure this is what you want?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," Clara said, pulling back to look into those sage-green eyes she'd fallen in love with by lamplight in her simple cabin. "I love you, Jacob. Not your name or your money or your father's cattle empire. I love the man who fixed my fence and braided rope and made me believe in tomorrow again." The wedding took place 6 weeks later in the garden of the Thornton mansion, but it was nothing like the society affair William might have once planned for his son. Clara wore her mother's simple white dress, altered to fit her slender frame, and carried wildflowers gathered from the Texas plains. Jacob wore a suit, but his boots were the same worn leather ones he'd had on when Clara found him in her barn. The guest list included cowboys and ranchers, neighbors from Clara's old homestead, and a handful of society friends who came out of curiosity and stayed out of genuine affection for the bride's grace and warmth. Clara had worried about fitting in. She discovered that sincerity and kindness were universal languages that even the most snobbish society matron could understand and respect. As they exchanged vows under the endless Texas sky, Clara thought about the storm that had brought them together, the desperate night when she'd fought death for the life of a stranger. She'd saved Jacob's life, but he'd returned the favor by showing her that love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances, that sometimes the greatest adventures came disguised as the simplest acts of compassion. "I promise to love you," Jacob said, his voice carrying clearly across the garden, not just in sickness and in health, but in poverty and in wealth, in anonymity and in prominence. It's in the quiet moments and the grand gestures. You saw me at my worst and loved me anyway. You are my salvation, my home, my heart. Clara's vows were equally heartfelt. "I promise to love you not for who the world says you are, but for who I know you to be. The man who braids rope with patient hands, who gentles wild horses and wounded hearts with equal skill. You came to me as a stranger and became my everything. Wherever you go, Whatever name you choose to use, I'll follow gladly." When they kissed to seal their union, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson that rivaled the happiness shining in their faces. The reception was a blend of elegant society and frontier celebration that shouldn't have worked, but somehow felt perfect. Cowboys danced with society ladies, ranchers shared stories with bankers, and Clara found herself surrounded by people who had come as strangers but were leaving as friends. Late in the evening, as the celebration wound down, Clara and Jacob slipped away to walk in the moonlit garden. The sounds of laughter and